Jimmy Patterson's weathered hands stopped mid-compression on the mountain lion's chest, his Purple Heart medal catching the orange glow of approaching flames. The 74-year-old Vietnam veteran's eyes widened as he felt the faintest heartbeat beneath his palms. This wasn't just any wild animal, it was a mother protecting newborn cubs in the path of Yellowstone's worst wildfire in decades. Sarah's scream pierced the smoky air as she stumbled from her news van, dropping her camera equipment. "Dad, what the hell are you doing?" The crackling of burning timber grew louder, ash falling like snow around the impossible scene. Martha's voice echoed in his memory. "Every life has purpose, Jimmy." But his estranged daughter hadn't spoken to him in 2 years, and now she was watching him risk everything for a predator most people would fear. "Get back to the road!" he shouted, without looking up, continuing the rhythmic compressions he'd learned on wounded soldiers 50 years ago. Who saves a mountain lion when wildfire threatens everything? And why was this old man willing to die trying? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. James "Jimmy" Patterson had never expected his 74th year to feel like the loneliest chapter of his life. The weathered cabin overlooking Yellowstone's northern range had been his sanctuary for 3 decades, but without Martha's laughter echoing through its pine-paneled rooms, it felt more like a tomb. Every morning, he still set 2 coffee cups on the kitchen table. Black coffee for himself, cream and sugar for the ghost of his beloved wife who'd lost her battle with cancer 3 years prior. "Another day without you, sweetheart," he whispered to Martha's photograph on the mantelpiece, her warm smile frozen in time from their 40th wedding anniversary. The Purple Heart beside her picture caught the morning light, a reminder of wounds that had never fully healed. The Vietnam War had ended 5 decades ago, but Jimmy still carried its weight in the tremor of his hands during thunderstorms and the way he jolted awake at 3 a.m. drenched in sweat. He'd served with the 101st Airborne Division from 1968 to 1970, watching boys become men and men become memories in the span of a heartbeat. The faces of his fallen brothers were carved into his memory, but it was the face of one Vietnamese child caught in crossfire during a village raid that haunted him most. "Some sins don't wash off, son," he'd tell his reflection each morning while shaving with the same straight razor he'd carried through the jungle. Martha had been the only one who could calm his nightmares, her gentle touch pulling him back from the battlefield of his dreams. His daughter Sarah hadn't called in 2 years, not since their bitter argument after Martha's funeral. She'd accused him of being emotionally unavailable, of choosing his war ghost over his family. "You came back from Vietnam, but you never really came home," she'd said, her words cutting deeper than any enemy bullet. Sarah was a successful journalist in Denver now, 45 years old and accomplished, but to Jimmy, she was still the little girl who used to climb into his lap during thunderstorms. The early-stage Alzheimer's diagnosis sat in his desk drawer like a ticking bomb. Dr. Morrison had delivered the news with clinical detachment 6 months ago, explaining how the disease would slowly steal his memories like a thief in the night. Jimmy hadn't told Sarah, couldn't bear the thought of becoming her burden after years of being her disappointment. His days followed a rigid routine born from military discipline. Morning coffee, afternoon walks to Crystal Creek where Martha used to paint watercolors, evening westerns on the old television. He'd secretly feed the local wildlife despite park regulations, finding solace in creatures that didn't judge his past or pity his present. "Getting old ain't for sissies," he'd mutter, quoting his favorite Bette Davis line while watching deer graze outside his window. The isolation was crushing, but it felt deserved, penance for a life that had taken more than it had given. He kept his loaded .45 in the nightstand drawer, just in case the memories get too loud. The August morning air hung thick and suffocating over Yellowstone, the kind of heat that made even the hardiest wildlife seek shelter in the deepest shadows. Jimmy Patterson wiped sweat from his weathered brow as he made his daily pilgrimage to Crystal Creek, Martha's old painting spot where she'd captured the dancing light on water with her delicate brush strokes. The familiar path felt different today, too quiet, with an eerie stillness that made his military instincts prickle. When the woods go quiet, something's wrong, he muttered, echoing his old sergeant's wisdom from the Mekong Delta. The usual chorus of birdsong was absent, replaced by an unsettling silence broken only by the distant rumble of aircraft. Smoke ribboned across the horizon like gray fingers reaching toward heaven, and Jimmy's trained eye recognized the signs: wildfire, spreading fast and heading their direction. Animals streamed past him in unusual numbers: deer, elk, even a black bear with cubs, all moving southward with the urgent purpose of creatures fleeing danger. Jimmy paused, watching a family of raccoons scurry past without their typical curiosity about human presence. In Vietnam, animal behavior had often warned of enemy movement. Here, it warned of nature's own advancing army of flame. Crystal Creek lay ahead, but something was terribly wrong. The usually babbling waterway had dwindled to a muddy trickle, victim of the worst drought in decades. What had once been Martha's favorite swimming hole was now a series of dried pools and cracked earth. Jimmy's heart sank as he approached the spot where his wife used to set up her easel, but movement in his peripheral vision made him freeze. There, trapped in what remained of the deepest pool, was a mountain lion. The magnificent female was clearly in distress, her golden coat matted with mud and her powerful hind leg twisted at an unnatural angle. She'd obviously tried to drink from the rapidly shrinking water source and become trapped when the muddy bottom gave way beneath her weight. Now she lay panting heavily, too exhausted to struggle further, but still alert enough to track Jimmy's approach with wary amber eyes. "Well, I'll be damned," Jimmy breathed, recognition dawning. This was the same cat he'd encountered 3 years ago. Though his failing memory couldn't quite grasp the details, something deep in his gut told him they'd met before. She had the same distinctive scar across her left shoulder, the same proud bearing even in defeat. The mountain lion's breathing was labored, and Jimmy's medic training immediately assessed her condition. Severe dehydration, possible heat exhaustion, and that injured leg would prevent any escape even if she found the strength to try. She was dying, and they both knew it. Jimmy's weathered hands trembled as he reached for his cell phone, knowing before he looked that there would be no signal. The remote location that had drawn Martha to paint here was now a death sentence for both him and the trapped animal. Park regulations strictly forbade civilian intervention with wildlife, but those same regulations seemed absurd when faced with a dying creature and a rapidly approaching fire. "Martha always said every life has purpose," he whispered, thinking of his wife's gentle philosophy that had sustained him through his darkest moments. She'd never met a wounded creature she wouldn't try to help, from injured birds to stray cats. What would she do in this situation? The answer came as clearly as if she'd spoken aloud: the right thing regardless of rules or consequences. Jimmy studied the trapped mountain lion with a tactician's eye, his military mind automatically formulating a rescue plan. The cat weighed at least 120 pounds, manageable for a younger man, impossible for a 74-year-old with arthritis and a weak heart. But Jimmy had learned long ago that impossible was just another word for difficult. He began removing his jacket, fashioning a makeshift stretcher from the sturdy canvas and fallen branches. His movements were slow and deliberate, partly from age, but mostly from caution. This wasn't a house cat. Even injured, she could kill him with one swipe of those powerful claws. "Easy there, Mama," he murmured, in the same tone he'd used to calm wounded soldiers in field hospitals. "I'm not here to hurt you. Just want to help you get home to your babies." The mountain lion's ears twitched at his voice, and Jimmy could swear he saw understanding in those golden eyes. She'd stopped struggling, watching him with an intelligence that seemed almost human. In that moment, Jimmy felt the same connection that had sustained him through combat, the recognition of one survivor acknowledging another. The sound of aircraft grew louder overhead, and Jimmy glanced up to see smoke jumpers' planes heading toward the fire line. Time was running out. Soon, evacuation orders would come, and he'd be forced to abandon this magnificent creature to die alone. Jimmy removed his Purple Heart from his shirt pocket, kissing the medal Martha had pinned on him so many years ago. "If I don't make it home, sweetheart, you tell me I tried," he whispered to the empty air, then stepped into the muddy water toward the waiting mountain lion. Jimmy's boots sank into the thick mud as he approached the trapped mountain lion, each step deliberate and measured like he was walking through a minefield. The big cat's breathing had become increasingly labored, her flanks heaving with exhaustion, but her golden eyes remained fixed on his every movement. Years of military training had taught him to read body language, and what he saw in those amber depths wasn't aggression. It was resignation, mixed with something that looked remarkably like hope. "Slow is smooth, smooth is fast," he whispered, reciting the old military axiom that had kept him alive in countless dangerous situations. The mountain lion's ears swiveled toward his voice, and Jimmy noticed something that made his weathered hands shake. Her belly was distended, rounded in a way that could only mean one thing. "Sweet Lord, you're having babies," he breathed, understanding flooding through him like ice water. This wasn't just about saving one life. There were cubs involved, probably due any moment based on the way she kept shifting and panting. The stress of being trapped, combined with dehydration and the approaching fire, was likely triggering premature labor. Jimmy's field medic instincts kicked into overdrive. He'd delivered babies before, human babies in makeshift hospitals during the war, when proper medical personnel were unavailable. But this was different. This was a wild predator who could kill him even while giving birth. And he was a 74-year-old man with arthritis and a heart condition attempting something that would challenge a veterinarian half his age. The mountain lion suddenly convulsed, a deep groan escaping her throat as the first contraction hit. Jimmy watched helplessly as she tried to find a comfortable position in the narrow confines of the muddy pool, her powerful body racked with pain she couldn't escape. "Easy, Mama, easy," Jimmy soothed, his voice taking on the same gentle cadence he'd used with Martha during her worst cancer treatments. "I know it hurts, but you're strong. We're going to get through this together." As if responding to his words, the mountain lion's breathing steadied slightly. Jimmy couldn't explain it, but there seemed to be an understanding passing between them. Two creatures recognizing each other's desperation and choosing trust over fear. The next contraction came harder, and Jimmy watched in amazement as the first cub began to emerge. His hands moved without conscious thought, drawing on decades-old medical training as he helped guide the tiny form into the world. The cub was perfect, small, wet, and mewing softly as Jimmy carefully cleared its airways with his shirt sleeve. "One down, probably one or two to go," he murmured, gently placing the newborn near its mother's head, where she could see and smell her baby. The mountain lion immediately began licking the cub with tender thoroughness, her maternal instincts overriding any concern about the human assisting her. The second cub came 20 minutes later, but something was wrong. The tiny form was blue and motionless, showing no signs of life. Jimmy's heart clenched as he recognized the signs. The cub wasn't breathing. Without hesitation, he began performing the same resuscitation techniques he'd used on newborn humans, his weathered fingers working to clear the tiny airways while his mouth provided gentle rescue breaths. "Come on, little one," he pleaded, pumping the cub's chest with careful pressure. "Your mama needs you. Come on now, breathe for me." For agonizing moments, nothing happened. Then, miraculously, the cub gave a tiny gasp and began to squirm. Jimmy felt tears streaming down his face as he placed the second baby with its mother and sibling, watching the mountain lion gather both cubs protectively under her chin. But their celebration was short-lived. The sound of approaching aircraft had intensified, and now Jimmy could hear the distant crackle of flames. Smoke was beginning to thicken the air, and he could see orange glowing on the horizon. The wildfire was moving faster than anyone had predicted, jumping containment lines and racing toward their location with devastating speed. His radio, forgotten in his jacket pocket, suddenly crackled to life. All civilians in sectors 7 through 12 must evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. Wildfire has jumped Highway 89 and is advancing rapidly toward Crystal Creek area. All personnel evacuate now. Jimmy looked at the exhausted mother mountain lion and her newborn cubs, then at the approaching wall of smoke and flame. The cats couldn't be moved safely. The mother was too weak from birth and the cubs too small to survive transport. But staying meant almost certain death for all of them. "Sorry, folks," he said into the radio without keying the transmit button. "Can't leave family behind." It was the same phrase he'd used in Vietnam when ordered to abandon wounded soldiers, and it carried the same weight now. Some things were more important than following orders, even when those orders made perfect sense. Jimmy began fashioning a shelter from fallen logs and his jacket, creating a small cave-like structure that might protect them from flying embers. His movements were urgent but careful, driven by the military understanding that preparation could mean the difference between life and death. The mountain lion watched his every move with those intelligent amber eyes, and Jimmy could swear she understood what he was trying to do. When he finished the makeshift shelter, she carefully moved her cubs inside, then looked back at him with an expression that seemed to say, "Thank you." As smoke began to sting his eyes and the sound of flames grew closer, Jimmy settled down beside the shelter, his .45 in his hand, not to use against the mountain lion, but to ensure she and her cubs wouldn't suffer if the fire overtook them before help arrived. "Well, Martha," he whispered to the thickening air, "looks like I might be seeing you sooner than expected." The rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors cut through the smoke-filled air like a mechanical heartbeat, growing louder with each passing second. Jimmy squinted through the haze, his weathered hand shielding his eyes as a sleek corporate helicopter descended toward the makeshift clearing near Crystal Creek. The aircraft bore the distinctive gold and black logo of Sterling Timber Corporation, and Jimmy's stomach clenched with a familiar dread. In his experience, corporate executives rarely brought good news to situations like this. The helicopter touched down with military precision, and from it emerged a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a boardroom rather than a wilderness emergency. Victoria Sterling was tall and imposing, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized her sharp cheekbones and steel-gray eyes. Her expensive outdoor gear looked fresh from the catalog, a stark contrast to Jimmy's mud-stained clothes and the primitive shelter he'd constructed around the mountain lion family. "Are you James Patterson?" Victoria called out as she approached, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I'm Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Timber. I need you to evacuate this area immediately." Jimmy remained seated beside the shelter, his protective stance making his intentions clear. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but I can't leave just yet. Got a family situation here that needs tending to." Victoria's expression hardened as she noticed the makeshift den and heard the soft mewing of the cubs. "Mr. Patterson? I don't have time for animal rescue operations. We're constructing an emergency fire break through this entire sector. Every minute you delay puts lives at risk." "These are lives, too," Jimmy replied quietly, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "And I don't abandon family, corporate lady or not. Before Victoria could respond, another vehicle approached, a dust-covered news van that lurched to a stop beside the helicopter. Jimmy's heart nearly stopped as he recognized the familiar figure that emerged. Sarah Patterson, his estranged daughter, looking every inch the successful journalist with her professional camera equipment and determined expression. "Dad?" Sarah's voice cracked as she took in the surreal scene. Her elderly father sitting calmly beside a wild mountain lion while smoke billowed on the horizon. "What in God's name are you doing here?" The reunion Jimmy had both longed for and dreaded was happening in the worst possible circumstances. Sarah looked older than her 45 years, her brown hair streaked with premature gray, and worry lines etched around eyes that were so much like Martha's. She wore the confident armor of a successful career woman, but Jimmy could see the vulnerable daughter beneath. "Sarah, honey, what are you doing here?" Jimmy asked, genuine surprise mixing with paternal concern. "I'm covering the wildfire story for the network," Sarah replied, her journalistic training warring with personal emotion. "But that's not important right now. Dad, you need to evacuate. This whole area is going to be consumed by fire within hours." Victoria Sterling stepped forward, seizing the opportunity. "Ms. Patterson, perhaps you can talk sense into your father. I understand family loyalty, but this is madness. We have teams standing by to construct a fire break that could save thousands of acres and potentially the entire town of Gardner. Your father's animal rescue is preventing us from beginning critical work." Sarah's eyes flashed with the same stubborn fire that Jimmy recognized from her childhood. "My father's what? You're telling me he's risking his life to save a mountain lion?" "A mother with newborn cubs," Jimmy corrected gently. "They can't be moved safely, and I won't leave them to burn." The tension between the three was interrupted by the arrival of a battered ATV carrying Dr. Michael Thompson, the local wildlife veterinarian. Jimmy had met him once before at a community meeting, a dedicated young man in his 30s who'd given up a lucrative practice in California to work with Yellowstone's animals. "Mr. Patterson," Dr. Thompson called out as he dismounted, his medical bag in hand. "I heard on the radio that you were performing veterinary field work. That's incredible. Where did you learn those skills?" Jimmy's face flushed with embarrassment. "Army medic back in Vietnam. Figured babies are babies, whether they're human or otherwise." Dr. Thompson knelt beside the shelter and carefully examined the mountain lion family. "This is extraordinary work," he said with genuine admiration. "The mother is stable and these cubs are healthy. You likely saved all 3 lives." He looked up at Jimmy with newfound respect. "Sir, I've been practicing veterinary medicine for 10 years, and I've never seen field conditions handled this expertly by a civilian." Victoria Sterling's patience was wearing thin. "Dr. Thompson, I respect your professional opinion, but we have a corporate responsibility here. Sterling Timber has contracts with the Forest Service to provide emergency firebreak services. If we don't act now, this fire could destroy millions of dollars in timber and threaten human lives." "Ma'am," Jimmy said, his voice taking on the quiet authority he'd used to command respect in the military. "I've seen enough destruction in my lifetime. Sometimes you have to choose what's worth saving, and these innocent creatures didn't ask for any of this." Sarah studied her father with new eyes, seeing something she'd never noticed before, or perhaps had forgotten. "Dad, you never told me about the Alzheimer's diagnosis." The words hit Jimmy like a physical blow. "How did you—" "I'm an investigative journalist, remember? I still have contacts at the VA hospital." Sarah's voice softened with hurt. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you let me help?" Jimmy's weathered hands trembled as he looked at his daughter. "Didn't want to be your burden, sweetheart. You've got your own life, your career. I've been nothing but a disappointment to you since your mother died." "A disappointment?" Sarah's voice rose with emotion. "Dad, You're sitting here risking your life to save a wild animal family while a forest fire bears down on you. You delivered cubs with your bare hands. How could you ever think you're a disappointment?" Victoria Sterling watched this family drama unfold with growing impatience, but something in their exchange triggered an unexpected memory. Her hand unconsciously moved to the photo she always carried in her jacket pocket, her son Tommy, smiling brightly beside a campfire just days before the mountain lion attack that had taken his life 3 years ago. "Mr. Patterson," Victoria said, her voice slightly less rigid, "I understand you believe you're doing the right thing, but some situations require difficult choices. Sometimes saving one life means sacrificing others." Jimmy looked directly at her, his blue eyes holding depths of pain she hadn't expected. "Ma'am, I learned in Vietnam that every choice has consequences. I've made my share of wrong ones, but I also learned that some choices define who you are when everything else is stripped away." Dr. Thompson had been monitoring the radio traffic and looked up with urgency. "The fire has jumped another containment line. We have maybe 2 hours before it reaches this location. The helicopter is our only viable evacuation method." Sarah knelt beside her father, her hand touching his shoulder. "Dad, please. I can't lose you too. Not like this. Not when we haven't—" Her voice broke. "Not when I haven't told you I'm sorry for all those angry words after Mom's funeral." Jimmy's eyes filled with tears he'd been holding back for 2 years. "Honey, I'm the one who should apologize. Your mother always said I came back from Vietnam but never really came home. She was right. I've been fighting that war in my head for 50 years, and it made me a poor father to you." The mountain lion stirred in her shelter, lifting her head to look at the gathered humans. Her golden eyes seemed to assess each person before settling on Jimmy with what could only be described as trust. One of the cubs mewed softly, and she immediately began cleaning it with gentle thoroughness. "Look at that," Dr. Thompson said softly. "She's not showing any fear or aggression toward us." "In 30 years of wildlife work, I've never seen a wild mountain lion display this level of comfort around humans. It's like she knows you're trying to help." Victoria Sterling found herself staring at the tender scene of animal motherhood, remembering her own fierce protectiveness toward Tommy. The memory of tucking him into his sleeping bag that last night, promising him they'd see elk in the morning, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. The radio crackled again with increasingly urgent evacuation orders, but Jimmy remained steadfast beside the shelter, his daughter now sitting beside him, and his unlikely allies grappling with choices that would define them all. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it the acrid smell of burning timber and the terrifying roar of an approaching inferno. What had been distant orange glows on the horizon now blazed visibly through the trees, and the temperature around Crystal Creek began to climb with ominous speed. Jimmy felt the familiar tightness in his chest that had plagued him since his heart attack scare 2 years prior, but he pushed the discomfort aside. There would be time for weakness later, if there was a later. "Jesus Christ," Sarah whispered, her journalistic composure finally cracking as she stared at the wall of flame advancing through the forest. "Dad, we have to go, now." Victoria Sterling's corporate facade was also beginning to crumble as the reality of their situation hit home. She'd faced hostile boardrooms and million-dollar negotiations, but nothing had prepared her for the raw, primal terror of being trapped in the path of a wildfire. "My pilot says we have maybe 30 minutes before the smoke gets too thick for safe helicopter operation," she announced, her voice betraying the first hints of genuine fear. Jimmy's military training kicked in as he assessed their tactical situation. The fire was approaching from the northwest, driven by winds that were only getting stronger. The creek bed offered some protection, but not enough. Their escape routes were narrowing by the minute, and the helicopter, their lifeline to safety, would soon become unusable. In war, you don't leave anyone behind, Jimmy said quietly, more to himself than to the others. But Sarah heard him, and something in her father's tone reminded her of the man she'd admired as a child, before Vietnam's ghosts had built walls between them. "Dad, what are you thinking?" Sarah asked, recognizing the look in his eyes, the same expression he'd worn when planning her elaborate childhood birthday parties or figuring out how to fix her broken bicycle. Jimmy stood slowly, his arthritis protesting, but his mind sharp with purpose. "We're going to use the creek as a natural fire break. Dr. Thompson, how much water do we need to keep these cats cool and protected?" Dr. Thompson looked around the dried creek bed with growing understanding. "If we can create a water barrier about 20 feet wide and dig down to where there's still moisture in the soil, it might work. The fire would have to jump a significant gap." "That's insane," Victoria protested. "We're talking about moving tons of earth and rock with our bare hands in less than an hour." Jimmy turned to face her, and for the first time, Victoria saw past the weathered exterior to the steel core beneath. "Ma'am, I helped build fire-base perimeters in Vietnam under enemy fire. This isn't about what's possible, it's about what's necessary." But even as he spoke those confident words, Jimmy felt his chest tighten again. The stress, the smoke, and the physical exertion were taking their toll on his 74-year-old body. He gripped Sarah's arm for support, hoping she wouldn't notice, but her sharp eyes caught everything. "Dad, you're having chest pains," Sarah said, alarm creeping into her voice. "I'm fine," Jimmy lied, but the tremor in his hands betrayed him. Dr. Thompson immediately moved to his side, professional concern replacing his earlier admiration. "Mr. Patterson, you need to sit down. Your pulse is irregular and you're showing signs of cardiac stress." Jimmy waved him away, but his legs felt increasingly unsteady. "Can't sit now, Doc. Got work to do." Victoria Sterling watched this exchange with a growing sense of unease that had nothing to do with the approaching fire. Something about Jimmy's determination in the face of obvious physical distress was triggering memories she'd spent 3 years trying to suppress. Memories of another person who'd refused to give up when faced with impossible odds. "Mr. Patterson," she said, her voice softer than before, "why is this so important to you? Why risk everything for a wild animal?" Jimmy looked at her with eyes that held 5 decades of pain. "Ma'am, I killed a child in Vietnam. 8 years old, caught in crossfire during a village raid. Been carrying that face with me ever since." His voice broke slightly. "Sometimes saving someone else is the only way to save yourself." The confession hung in the smoky air like a physical presence. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as pieces of her father's puzzle finally clicked into place. The nightmares, the drinking, the walls he'd built around his heart. Victoria's hand instinctively moved to the photo in her pocket. "How old was the child?" she asked quietly. 8, Jimmy repeated. "Same age as—" He stopped, studying Victoria's face. "You lost someone too, didn't you?" Victoria's composed mask finally shattered completely. "My son Tommy. He was 8 when a mountain lion attacked our campsite 3 years ago. His father and I were arguing about work, not paying attention, and Tommy wandered away from the fire." Her voice became raw with grief. "By the time we found him, it was too late." The revelation struck the group like lightning. Sarah understood immediately why Victoria seemed so driven to construct fire breaks, why she was so insistent about evacuation procedures. She was trying to prevent other families from experiencing her loss. "Ma'am," Jimmy said gently, "I'm sorry for your boy, I truly am. But hate's a heavy load to carry, and it doesn't bring them back." "You don't understand," Victoria replied, her professional composure completely gone. "I've spent 3 years convincing myself that eliminating threats was the answer. Every tree we cut down, every animal we relocate, I told myself it was making the wilderness safer for other families. Dr. Thompson looked between them with growing comprehension. That's why Sterling Timber suddenly started bidding on every Forest Service contract. You weren't expanding for profit. You were trying to control the wilderness. The mountain lion stirred in her shelter, lifting her head to look at the arguing humans. One of her cubs had begun nursing, and the tender scene provided a stark contrast to the human drama unfolding around them. Jimmy noticed her attention and felt his chest tighten again, this time more severely. "Dad?" Sarah noticed him swaying slightly. "Dad, what's wrong?" Jimmy tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. The stress, the smoke, and the emotional weight of the confrontation had pushed his already strained heart beyond its limits. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest as pain radiated down his left arm. "Heart attack," Dr. Thompson diagnosed immediately, rushing to Jimmy's side. "Sarah, help me get him on his back. Victoria, do you have any emergency medical supplies in that helicopter?" As Dr. Thompson began CPR, Sarah held her father's hand and whispered urgently, "Don't you dare die on me now, old man. Not when we're finally talking again." Victoria stood frozen for a moment, watching the scene unfold. Here was a man who'd risked everything to save a wild animal family, who'd confessed his deepest shame to a stranger, who was literally dying to protect creatures that most people would consider dangerous. Her son, Tommy, had loved animals, had begged for a puppy just weeks before the camping trip that claimed his life. "Tommy loved lions," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "He had a stuffed lion named Leo that he slept with every night. He would have wanted me to save them." The mountain lion emerged from her shelter, moving slowly but deliberately toward the unconscious Jimmy. Dr. Thompson paused in his compressions, expecting the animal to flee or attack, but instead she lay down beside Jimmy's still form, her warm body pressed against his side as if sharing her strength. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Thompson whispered. "It's like she knows he's in trouble." The helicopter pilot's voice crackled over Victoria's radio. "Ma'am, we need to leave now. The fire has jumped the main road. This is our last chance for safe evacuation." Victoria looked at Jimmy's pale face, at Sarah holding vigil beside her father, at the mountain lion family that had somehow brought them all together in this moment of crisis. She thought of Tommy's laugh, of his innocent love for all creatures, of the man she'd been before grief had hardened her heart. "Negative," she told her pilot. "Prep the aircraft for medical evacuation, but we're not leaving without all of them." "Ma'am, the animals—" "All of them," Victoria repeated firmly. "Find a way." As if responding to her words, Jimmy's eyes fluttered open. He looked up at Sarah's tear-streaked face, then at the mountain lion beside him, and managed a weak smile. "Tell Martha," he whispered. "I tried to save them all." The helicopter lifted off from Crystal Creek just as the first flames reached the water's edge, carrying Jimmy Patterson's unconscious form toward Billings Hospital, while the wilderness he'd tried to protect disappeared beneath a curtain of smoke and fire. Sarah pressed her face against the aircraft's window, watching the orange glow consume everything they'd left behind, including the makeshift shelter where a mountain lion family had been born into chaos. Dr. Thompson had managed to stabilize Jimmy's heart rhythm during the frantic evacuation, but the prognosis remained grim. The stress, the smoke inhalation, his age, it's all working against him, the young veterinarian explained to Sarah as they rushed through the hospital corridors. "The next 24 hours will be critical." Sarah had never felt so helpless in her life. As an investigative journalist, she was accustomed to finding answers, exposing truth, making sense of complex situations. But sitting in the sterile waiting room, listening to the rhythmic beep of machines keeping her father alive, She felt like the lost little girl who used to climb into his lap during thunderstorms. "I wasted 2 years being angry," she whispered to the hospital chaplain who'd come to offer comfort. 2 years I could have spent understanding him, helping him with the Alzheimer's, just being his daughter. The chaplain, an elderly man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, sat quietly beside her. "Forgiveness isn't about the time we've lost, child. It's about the love we choose to give with the time we have left." Victoria Sterling paced the hallway like a caged animal, her expensive suit wrinkled and stained with smoke. She'd spent 3 years building armor around her heart, and watching Jimmy Patterson nearly die while saving a wild animal family had cracked that armor wide open. Every few minutes she pulled out her phone to check for updates from the fire line, though she dreaded what the reports might contain. "No survivors found at Crystal Creek," the text from her field supervisor read. "Complete burn-through of the area. No signs of wildlife." Victoria sank into a plastic chair beside Sarah, her hands shaking as she stared at the message. "They're gone," she said quietly. "The mountain lions. They didn't make it." Sarah looked up from the magazine she'd been pretending to read. "Dad's going to be devastated when he wakes up. If he wakes up." The machines attached to Jimmy continued their electronic symphony, but his vital signs remained worryingly weak. "He will wake up," Victoria said with a conviction that surprised even herself. "Men like your father don't quit. They find ways to keep fighting even when the odds are impossible." Through the long night, the two women maintained their vigil, sharing stories that revealed the complex man lying unconscious before them. Sarah talked about Jimmy's gentle side, how he'd taught her to fish, how he'd read her bedtime stories with different voices for every character, how he'd never missed a school play or soccer game despite his struggles with PTSD. Victoria found herself opening up about Tommy, describing her son's infectious laughter and his dream of becoming a veterinarian. "He used to bandage his stuffed animals and pretend to perform surgery on them," she said, tears flowing freely for the first time in 3 years. "After he died, I couldn't stand the sight of wild animals. I blamed them for taking my baby away." "And now?" Sarah asked gently. "Now I realize I was trying to control something that can't be controlled," Victoria admitted. "Your father showed me that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is accept the risk of loving something that might hurt you." At 3 a.m., Jimmy's vital signs took a turn for the worse. His heart rate became erratic, his breathing shallow, and the medical team rushed in with emergency equipment. Sarah grabbed his hand as doctors worked frantically around his bed. "Don't you dare leave me now, Dad," she whispered fiercely. "Not when I finally understand what Mom saw in you. Not when I know why she never gave up on you." Victoria stood at the foot of the bed, watching the medical team fight for Jimmy's life. She thought about her corporate board meetings, her profit margins, her carefully constructed business empire, and realized none of it mattered as much as this moment, watching strangers battle to save the life of a man who'd taught her something profound about courage and sacrifice. "Please," she found herself praying to a God she'd stopped believing in when Tommy died. "Please don't let him die thinking he failed. He saved me tonight. He saved all of us." The heart monitor flatlined with a piercing alarm that cut through the hospital night like a scream. Sarah collapsed against the bed, her body racked with sobs as the medical team continued their desperate efforts. Victoria moved to her side, her own tears falling as she placed a comforting hand on the younger woman's shoulder. For endless minutes, the room filled with the controlled chaos of emergency medicine. Dr. Morrison, the cardiologist who'd been treating Jimmy's heart condition, worked with the precision of a man who'd fought this battle countless times before. Medications were administered, electrical shocks delivered, and still the monitor showed that terrible flat line. "Come on, Jimmy," Dr. Morrison muttered as he performed manual chest compressions. You've survived Vietnam, you've survived loss, you've survived 74 years of life's punches. Don't quit on us now. Sarah held her breath, her journalist's training automatically noting details even in her grief. The smell of antiseptic, the fluorescent lights that cast harsh shadows, the dedication on the medical team's faces as they fought for her father's life. This was a story she'd never want to write, but the observations came anyway, a professional habit that couldn't be turned off even in personal tragedy. At 3:47 a.m., after 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours, Jimmy Patterson's heart resumed beating. The monitor's steady beep returned like a resurrection song, and Sarah collapsed with relief as her father's eyelids fluttered weakly. "Dad?" she whispered, leaning close to his face. "Can you hear me?" Jimmy's eyes opened slowly, unfocused but aware. His lips moved soundlessly for a moment before he managed to whisper, Did we save them?" Sarah exchanged a heartbroken glance with Victoria, both knowing that the mountain lion family had perished in the flames that consumed Crystal Creek. But looking at her father's hopeful face, Sarah couldn't bring herself to destroy what might be his final dream. "Yes, Dad," she lied gently. "You saved them all." 3 days after Jimmy Patterson's heart attack, as he lay recovering in his hospital bed with tubes and monitors tracking every breath, Dr. Michael Thompson burst through the door with news that would shatter everything they thought they knew about that terrible night at Crystal Creek. "They're alive," he announced breathlessly, his face flushed with excitement and disbelief. "The mountain lions! They're all alive!" Sarah looked up from the crossword puzzle she'd been working on beside her father's bed, certain she'd misheard. "What did you say?" "The mother and both cubs," Dr. Thompson continued, pulling out his phone to show grainy footage from a trail camera. "A ranger found them this morning in a natural cave system about half a mile downstream from where we left them. The mother somehow moved them there during the fire." Jimmy's eyes fluttered open at the commotion, his mind still cloudy from medication but sharp enough to understand the miracle being described. "The babies? They made it?" Victoria Sterling, who had barely left the hospital since Jimmy's heart attack, leaned forward with tears streaming down her face. For 3 days, she'd carried the weight of believing those innocent creatures had died because of her delays, her corporate protocols, her inability to act with the same courage Jimmy had shown. Dr. Thompson pulled up a clearer video on his tablet. "Look at this. The mother is in perfect health and the cubs are thriving. But here's the extraordinary part. She's been returning to the burned area around Crystal Creek every day, as if she's looking for someone." The footage showed the magnificent mountain lion standing at the edge of the charred landscape, her golden eyes scanning the destruction. She would spend hours there, calling out with soft chuffs, before returning to her cubs in the safety of the cave. "She's looking for you, Dad," Sarah said softly, understanding dawning in her voice. "She's looking for the man who saved her babies." Jimmy struggled to sit up in his hospital bed, his weathered hands trembling with emotion. "I need to see her. She needs to know I'm okay." "Absolutely not," came a firm voice from the doorway. Dr. Morrison, Jimmy's cardiologist, entered with a stern expression and a thick medical chart. "Mr. Patterson, you've suffered a massive heart attack. Your cardiac function is severely compromised and any additional stress could be fatal." But Jimmy's eyes held the same stubborn fire that had sustained him through Vietnam, through Martha's death, through decades of carrying guilt over one terrible moment in a war zone. "Doc, I've been dying a little every day since Martha passed. For the first time in 3 years, I have a reason to live." Sarah found herself torn between protecting her father and understanding his desperate need for purpose. "Dad, the doctors know what's best." "The doctors know medicine," Jimmy interrupted gently. "But they don't know healing. There's a difference, sweetheart." Victoria Sterling had been silent during this exchange, but now she stepped forward with a proposal that surprised everyone. "What if we could bring her to you?" Dr. Thompson shook his head immediately. "Absolutely impossible. You can't relocate a wild mountain lion to a hospital. The stress would be enormous for the animal, not to mention the legal and safety issues." "Not to the hospital," Victoria clarified, her business mind already working through logistics. "Sterling Timber owns a wildlife rehabilitation facility about 30 miles from here. It's equipped with medical facilities and observation areas. We could arrange for a controlled meeting under proper supervision." Dr. Morrison looked skeptical. "The patient isn't stable enough for transport. Even a 30-mile journey could trigger another cardiac event." "Then we wait," Jimmy said with quiet determination. "However long it takes." But waiting became complicated when Jimmy's condition took an unexpected turn. The Alzheimer's symptoms, which had been progressing slowly for months, suddenly accelerated dramatically. The trauma and stress of the heart attack seemed to have damaged something fundamental in his brain's ability to process memories. Sarah watched in heartbreak as her father began confusing past and present, sometimes thinking he was back in Vietnam, other times believing Martha was still alive. But strangely, his memories of the mountain lion rescue remained crystal clear, as if that experience had burned itself into a part of his mind that the disease couldn't touch. "That's actually not uncommon," Dr. Morrison explained to Sarah and Victoria during a consultation. "Traumatic or emotionally significant events can create what we call crystallized memories. They become protected from the normal deterioration patterns we see in Alzheimer's patients." "So he'll remember saving the mountain lion but forget my name?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking. "It's possible," Dr. Morrison admitted gently. "The mind protects what it deems most important." Victoria Sterling found herself visiting Jimmy daily, drawn by something she couldn't quite explain. She would sit beside his bed and tell him stories about Tommy, about her own childhood, about the dreams she'd abandoned when grief consumed her life. In his lucid moments, Jimmy would listen with the patient attention of a man who understood profound loss. "I built walls after Tommy died," she confessed during one of these visits. "I thought if I could control enough of the wilderness, eliminate enough threats, I could prevent other families from experiencing what I went through." Jimmy nodded with the wisdom of someone who'd spent decades building his own walls. "Grief makes us do crazy things, ma'am. I once spent an entire year trying to find the family of that child I killed in Vietnam. Thought if I could apologize, make amends somehow, it would bring him back." "Did you find them?" "No," Jimmy said quietly. "But I learned that some kinds of healing don't come from going backward. They come from choosing to love something again, even when you're terrified of losing it." It was during one of these conversations that Dr. Thompson brought remarkable news. The mountain lion had done something unprecedented. She had brought her cubs to the edge of human territory, to a meadow visible from the highway, and was spending entire days there, as if waiting for something. "This behavior is completely outside normal mountain lion patterns," Dr. Thompson explained to the group gathered in Jimmy's hospital room. "She's exposing herself and her cubs to human presence, which goes against every survival instinct. It's like she's hoping for contact." Sarah pulled up the live webcam footage that park rangers had set up to monitor the situation. The mother mountain lion sat regally in the meadow, her cubs playing nearby, but her attention was focused on the road where vehicles passed. Every time a car appeared, she would lift her head with obvious interest, only to settle back down when it continued past. "She's waiting for Dad's truck," Sarah realized. "She recognizes the sound of his engine." Jimmy watched the footage with tears in his eyes. "She kept her babies safe, just like I hoped she would. She's a good mama." But Jimmy's condition continued to deteriorate. The combination of heart damage and accelerating dementia left him confused and weak. And some days he didn't recognize Sarah at all. Other days he would ask repeatedly when Martha was coming to visit. The medical team began discussing hospice care and end-of-life decisions. It was Victoria who made the decision that would change everything. Against all medical advice and legal protocols, she arranged for a specialized wildlife transport vehicle to bring the mountain lion family to a secure observation area at her rehabilitation facility. If Jimmy couldn't go to them, she would bring them to him. "This is madness," Dr. Morrison protested when Victoria presented her plan. "The liability alone—" "Doctor," Victoria interrupted with the steel voice that had dominated boardrooms for decades. "This man saved my soul when I didn't even know I'd lost it. I will not let him die believing he failed those animals." Sarah supported Victoria's decision despite her own fears. "Dad's not going to recover from this, is he? The heart attack, the dementia, he's dying." "Doctor." Morrison's silence was answer enough. "Then let him see them one more time," Sarah said firmly. "Let him know that his sacrifice meant something." The transport was arranged for the following week, contingent on Jimmy's condition remaining stable. But on the night before the planned reunion, Jimmy suffered another major cardiac episode. As Sarah held vigil beside his bed, watching machines fight to keep her father's damaged heart beating, she couldn't help but think about the cosmic injustice of it all. "He finally found something worth living for," she whispered to Victoria, who had arrived despite the late hour. "After 3 years of just existing, he found purpose again. And now he gets to see the fruits of his courage," Victoria finished gently. "Whatever happens tomorrow, he'll know that his choice to save them was right." In his semi-conscious state, Jimmy mumbled incoherently about babies crying, about Martha calling his name, about the sound of helicopter rotors and the smell of smoke. But occasionally, clearly and with perfect lucidity, he would say, "Tell Mama Cat I kept my promise." The mountain lion family arrived at dawn, transported in a specialized vehicle that allowed them to remain together while ensuring everyone's safety. As the transport pulled into the rehabilitation facility, the mother mountain lion immediately became alert, her head turning toward the building where Jimmy lay dying, as if she could sense his presence through steel and concrete. "It's time," Victoria told Sarah as they prepared to wheel Jimmy's bed to the observation window. "Let's show him what love looks like when it crosses all boundaries." The morning sun streamed through the observation windows of Sterling Timber's wildlife rehabilitation facility as Jimmy Patterson was carefully wheeled toward what everyone believed would be his final goodbye. His breathing was labored, his face pale against the white hospital pillows, but his eyes remained alert as Sarah pushed his wheelchair to the reinforced glass barrier that separated them from the secure animal enclosure. "Are you ready for this, Dad?" Sarah asked gently, her hand resting on his shoulder as Victoria Sterling made final adjustments to the room's lighting and camera systems. Jimmy nodded weakly, his gaze fixed on the transport crate being positioned in the enclosure beyond the glass. Dr. Thompson worked with quiet efficiency, ensuring the mountain lion family's release would be as stress-free as possible for both the animals and the dying man who had risked everything to save them. The first to emerge was one of the cubs, now noticeably larger and more confident than the tiny, barely breathing creature Jimmy had resuscitated with his own breath just 2 weeks earlier. The young mountain lion stretched its small limbs and began exploring the new environment with typical feline curiosity, its movements graceful and strong. "Look at him go," Jimmy whispered, his voice barely audible but filled with wonder. "He's perfect." The second cub followed, equally healthy and vibrant, and Jimmy's eyes filled with tears as he watched both babies play together in the safety of their temporary home. But it was when the mother emerged that the true magic of the moment revealed itself. The magnificent female mountain lion stepped into the enclosure with regal bearing, her golden coat gleaming in the morning light. But instead of exploring her new surroundings or checking on her cubs, she moved directly to the observation window. Her amber eyes seemed to scan the room beyond the glass until they found exactly what they were looking for. Jimmy Patterson and the mountain lion looked at each other through the reinforced barrier, and something passed between them that defied every scientific explanation Dr. Thompson had ever studied. The great cat approached the window and sat down directly in front of Jimmy's wheelchair, her gaze never leaving his face. "My God," Dr. Thompson breathed. "She recognizes him." The mountain lion placed one massive paw against the glass, and Jimmy, summoning strength from some deep reserve, lifted his own trembling hand to mirror her gesture. For several minutes they remained like that, man and wild animal separated by inches of glass but connected by something far stronger than physical barriers. "Thank you, Mama," Jimmy whispered, his voice carrying across the quiet room. "Thank you for letting me help." As if responding to his words, the mountain lion made a soft, chuffing sound, the same gentle noise she used to call her cubs. She began what could only be described as a purr, a deep rumbling that seemed to emanate from her entire body. The sound was so profound it could be felt as much as heard, and Jimmy closed his eyes with a smile of perfect contentment. Sarah watched this extraordinary interaction with tears streaming down her face, finally understanding what her father had been trying to tell her all these years. This wasn't about animals or wilderness or even redemption. It was about the fundamental need to matter, to know that your existence had made a positive difference in the world. Victoria Sterling stood transfixed by the scene unfolding before them. For 3 years, she had seen mountain lions as instruments of death, creatures that had robbed her of her most precious treasure. But watching this gentle communication between Jimmy and the mother cat, she began to understand what her son Tommy had always known, that wild animals weren't monsters to be feared or controlled, but fellow beings deserving of respect and protection. "She's saying goodbye," Dr. Thompson observed quietly. "And thank you." The mountain lion remained at the window for nearly an hour, sometimes lying down with her cubs playing around her feet, sometimes standing to press her nose against the glass where Jimmy's hand rested. Her behavior was unlike anything in the wildlife veterinarian's experience, a wild predator showing what could only be interpreted as affection and gratitude toward a human being. During this time, Jimmy's condition seemed to stabilize. His breathing became less labored, his color improved slightly, and his eyes remained clear and focused. It was as if the sight of the thriving mountain lion family was providing him with the peace his damaged heart needed to find its rhythm. "Dad," Sarah said softly, "I need to tell you something. I'm sorry I wasted so much time being angry. I'm sorry I didn't understand what you were carrying all these years. You're the bravest man I've ever known." Jimmy turned his attention from the mountain lions to his daughter, his weathered hand reaching for hers. "Sweetheart, your mother always said forgiveness was a gift we give ourselves. I should have told you about Vietnam years ago, should have let you help me carry the load." "You're telling me now," Sarah replied, squeezing his fingers gently. "That's what matters." Victoria stepped forward, her own emotions overwhelming her usual composure. "Mr. Patterson, Jimmy, you saved more than just animals that day. You saved me from becoming someone I couldn't live with. You reminded me that courage isn't about building walls to keep pain out. It's about opening your heart even when you're terrified." Jimmy looked at this powerful woman who had transformed from corporate adversary to unlikely friend. "Ma'am, your boy Tommy would be proud of who you're choosing to become. Sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to choose life." As the afternoon progressed, The mountain lion family gradually adapted to their temporary environment, but the mother never strayed far from the observation window. She seemed content to remain close to the man who had given her and her cubs a second chance at life, as if standing guard over his final hours. Dr. Thompson documented everything, knowing that this unprecedented interspecies interaction would revolutionize understanding of wildlife behavior and emotional intelligence. But for Jimmy, Sarah, and Victoria, the scientific implications mattered far less than the simple, profound connection they were witnessing. As evening approached, Jimmy's strength began to fade again, but his spirit remained peaceful. "I want to be buried next to Martha," he told Sarah. "And I want a donation made to the wildlife rehabilitation program here. These animals deserve advocates." "Of course, Dad," Sarah promised. "And Sarah," Jimmy continued, his voice growing weaker, "I want you to write about this, not just as a journalist, but as my daughter. People need to know that love doesn't end at species boundaries. They need to understand that every life has value." The mountain lion seemed to sense the change in Jimmy's condition. She moved closer to the window and began that deep, comforting purr again, as if offering what solace she could to the man who had saved her family. Her cubs, picking up on their mother's behavior, also approached the glass, creating a family portrait that would remain etched in everyone's memory forever. As the sun set over the Montana landscape, Jimmy Patterson closed his eyes one final time, his hand still pressed against the glass where the mountain lion's paw waited on the other side. His last words, spoken so softly that only Sarah could hear them, were, "Tell Martha I found my way home." The mountain lion remained at the window until well after midnight, maintaining her vigil over the man who had shown her that kindness could exist between the most unlikely allies. 6 months after Jimmy Patterson's peaceful passing, Sarah stood in the same observation room where her father had said his final goodbye to the mountain lion family. The facility had been transformed into the Martha and Jimmy Patterson Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, funded by an unexpected partnership between Sarah's inheritance and Victoria Sterling's corporate resources. The mountain lions had been successfully relocated to a protected sanctuary, but their story continued to ripple outward in ways none of them could have imagined. "Your father would be amazed by all this," Victoria said, joining Sarah at the window where Jimmy had spent his last conscious hours. The older woman had aged visibly over the past months, but there was a lightness in her bearing that hadn't been there before. The burden of grief slowly transforming into purposeful action. Sarah nodded, clutching the manuscript she'd been working on for months. "The book comes out next week. The Soldier Who Spoke to Lions, a story of redemption and second chances. The publisher thinks it could reach a lot of people who need to hear Dad's message." The rehabilitation center had become more than just a medical facility for injured wildlife. It had evolved into something unprecedented, a place where veterans struggling with PTSD could find healing through working with rescued animals. The program, inspired by Jimmy's own journey, paired former military personnel with wildlife in need of care, creating bonds that helped heal wounds both visible and invisible. "We have 12 veterans enrolled in the program now," Dr. Thompson reported as he joined them in the observation room. "The results have been remarkable. These men and women are finding purpose again, just like your father did." Among the program participants was Robert "Bobby" Martinez, a 62-year-old Marine veteran from the Iraq War who had been struggling with severe depression and survivor's guilt. Like Jimmy, Bobby had carried the weight of civilian casualties for years, unable to forgive himself for following orders that had resulted in unintended deaths. Working with an injured golden eagle that had been struck by a vehicle, Bobby had discovered the same truth Jimmy had found. Sometimes saving someone else is the only way to save yourself. "That eagle reminds me why I fought," Bobby told Sarah during one of her visits to document the program. "Not to destroy, but to protect. Taking care of him helps me remember the man I used to be before the war changed everything." Victoria Sterling had undergone her own transformation, stepping back from day-to-day operations at Sterling Timber to focus on conservation efforts. The Tommy Sterling Foundation, named for her lost son, had become a major force in wildlife protection across the Pacific Northwest. Her corporate board had initially resisted the shift away from aggressive logging practices, but the publicity from Jimmy's story and the subsequent conservation program had generated unexpected profits through ecotourism and sustainable forestry partnerships. "My stockholders thought I'd lost my mind," Victoria confided to Sarah with a wry smile. "Turns out that doing the right thing can also be good business." Who would have thought? The mountain lion family that had started it all thrived in their new protected habitat 300 miles away. Park rangers reported that the mother, now tagged and monitored, had successfully raised her cubs to independence. Remarkably, both young mountain lions displayed unusual tolerance for human presence, not aggressive or overly friendly, but comfortable in ways that suggested their early interaction with Jimmy had left a lasting imprint. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a wildlife behaviorist from Montana State University, had been studying the family for months. "What we're seeing challenges fundamental assumptions about wildlife imprinting and interspecies bonding," she explained during a presentation at the Rehabilitation Center. "These animals retain what can only be described as positive associations with humans, specifically related to care and protection rather than threat or competition." Sarah's book had attracted attention from unexpected quarters. Veterans organizations across the country were using Jimmy's story in their therapy programs, while wildlife conservation groups cited it as evidence for more humane approaches to human-animal conflict resolution. Most surprisingly, geriatric care facilities had begun incorporating the story into programs designed to help elderly patients find renewed purpose in their later years. "Your father's journey resonates with so many people who feel like their best years are behind them," Dr. Emily Patterson, no relation, a gerontologist in Seattle, explained to Sarah. "He demonstrates that age doesn't disqualify us from heroism, that our accumulated wisdom and experience can be exactly what the world needs." The Rehabilitation Center itself had become a pilgrimage site of sorts for families dealing with similar struggles. Parents brought children to see where kindness had triumphed over fear, while adult children brought aging parents to witness proof that life's final chapters could be filled with meaning and purpose. Among the most frequent visitors was an unlikely friendship pair. Tom Bradley, a 68-year-old retired electrician from Billings, and his estranged son Michael, a 45-year-old attorney from Denver. Their relationship had been fractured for years over political disagreements and generational misunderstandings, but Jimmy's story had prompted Michael to reach out to his father after 2 decades of minimal contact. Reading about how Sarah and her dad reconciled made me realize I was wasting time I couldn't get back, Michael told Sarah during one of their visits. "My father isn't perfect, but he's still my father." Jimmy Patterson's story reminded me that love doesn't require agreement on everything else. Tom Bradley had found his own inspiration in Jimmy's courage. "I'm not getting any younger, and I've been playing it safe for too long," he confided to Sarah. "Your dad showed me that it's never too late to take a stand for something important." Tom had begun volunteering at a local animal shelter. Despite having no previous experience with wildlife, discovering a passion for animal care that had surprised everyone, including himself. The financial success of the Rehabilitation Center had enabled Sarah to establish a scholarship program for veterinary students specializing in wildlife medicine. The first recipient was Maria Gonzalez, a 24-year-old from a farming family in Wyoming who had been inspired by Jimmy's story to pursue a career helping injured animals. "I never thought someone like me could make a difference," Maria told Sarah. "But your father proved that you don't need a degree or special training to save lives. You just need to care enough to try." Victoria Sterling found herself thinking about Tommy more often, but the memories no longer carried the crushing weight of grief that had defined her existence for 3 years. "I can remember his laugh now without immediately thinking about how it ended," she told Sarah during one of their regular coffee meetings. "Jimmy taught me that honoring the dead doesn't require us to stop living." The mountain lion family had grown, with the mother successfully mating again and producing a second litter. Rangers reported that she was teaching all her cubs the same unusual tolerance for humans that had characterized her interaction with Jimmy. It was as if she was passing down a genetic memory of kindness, ensuring that future generations would remember that not all humans were threats. Dr. Thompson had documented enough cases of successful human-wildlife interaction through the program to begin drafting new protocols for wildlife management agencies. "What Jimmy started here could revolutionize how we approach conservation," he explained to Sarah. "Instead of viewing humans and wildlife as inevitably in conflict, we're proving that cooperation and mutual respect are not only possible, but beneficial for both species." As Sarah prepared to leave Montana and return to her journalism career in Denver, she felt the profound weight of carrying her father's legacy forward. The book tour would take her across the country, sharing Jimmy's story with audiences who needed to hear that redemption was always possible, that second chances existed at any age, that love could bridge any divide. Standing one last time in the observation room where her father had found peace, Sarah whispered a promise to the empty space. "I'll make sure they remember, Dad. I'll make sure people know that heroes come in all ages and that it's never too late to choose love over fear." The Martha and Jimmy Patterson Wildlife Rehabilitation Center would continue its work long after Sarah's departure, a living testament to the truth that one person's courage to act with compassion could change the world in ways both seen and unseen, touching lives across generations and species in an endless ripple of healing and hope. Dear friends, Jimmy Patterson's story reminds us that life's greatest chapters can be written at any age. At 74, when the world might have expected him to fade quietly into retirement, Jimmy discovered that true purpose isn't bound by our years. It's defined by our willingness to love fearlessly, even when we're terrified of the cost. His courage to save a mountain lion family while battling his own mortality shows us that our accumulated wisdom, scars, and experiences aren't signs of decline. They're the very tools we need to become the heroes our world desperately needs. Whether you're 55 or 85, whether you feel forgotten by a youth-obsessed culture or diminished by physical limitations, Jimmy's legacy whispers the truth. Your best moments may still be ahead of you, waiting for the courage to step into them. What's one dream you've been afraid to pursue because you thought you were too old? What act of courage is your heart calling you to take, regardless of what others might think?